Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So the purpose of this talk is to put forth a comprehensive classification system of what factors I believe contribute to an individual's survivability not only in the wake of disaster but in life in general. So having state-of-the-art survival gear and a good bug-out location are important, but insufficient in and of themselves at increasing your survivability in a post-disaster situation. The following 10 categories will encompass the complete spectrum of psychological, emotional, social, and spiritual aspects that comprise what I believe to be the holistic survivor. If you enjoy the After the Collapse videos, please cast your vote by liking, commenting, and subscribing. Thanks for watching. So you can assess your own survivability by ranking your capabilities along the following 10 dimensions on a scale of 1 to 10 for a total out of 100. Now I've used the letter T because it seems to be the most generous in terms of its provision of words to be used to describe these 10 categories, which I believe to be exhaustive of the many factors that go into a person's survivability. So the following 10 dimensions are not necessarily in a hierarchical or priority-based order, but I tried to do so to the best of my ability, starting with the most material or physical in nature and progressing to the most abstract in nature. So let's get into it. So the first category is temple. So this category encompasses your physical body. It has been said that your body is your temple. So your body is the temple of consciousness, where your consciousness or soul resides, if you will, if that's your belief system. So it is primary to your survival, and without it, none of these subsequent categories that I'm going to talk about could exist. So above all else, securing your physical health is the primary goal of survival. So that's why I always emphasize that should be people's first and foremost priority is your health in check right now? Because really longevity is everything. The whole point of survival is health and longevity. So we absolutely must emphasize this in the earlier phases of our preparedness strategy, is building up our temple to be as strong as possible and as fortified as possible to resist the onslaught of adversity that may come our way. The next category is tools. Some other words that work to describe this category are technology or the tenable. So materials, resources, and tools are indispensable to achieving a sustainable and even flourishing level of subsistence pre or post collapse. Gear is absolutely essential to your survival, especially in this day and age. The more technology you have, the more you can produce, and the more empowered you and your community will become. The next category is territory or terrain, topography, or turf. Location, location, location is the answer here. So where you choose to lay anchor will be the determining factor as to what degree you must draw from the other categories that I lay out here. Some will require emphasis on resource acquisition, others will require rationing of certain supplies. Some environments are going to be bountiful in certain resources, but perhaps they'll be unsafe. Others will be barren, but typically they're going to be secure. So usually there are pros and cons to all environments, be they urban or rural. Having a safe bug-out location is absolutely crucial. The next category I'm going to talk about is temperament. So this category encompasses the emotional aspects of survival. So your ability to self-regulate your emotions is going to be absolutely imperative to your survival. So you have to be able to keep a cool head in stressful situations. You have to have a positive attitude and possibly even a sense of humor. You have to keep your anxiety under control and try not to get overly excited. Anger and depression are not going to help you one bit when it comes to surviving in a post-disaster situation. Emotion is directly tied to the body, so grounding exercises like deep breathing can work to control anxiety. The body and emotion are intimately interconnected, which is why I have this category so close to the top of the list in terms of priorities. So if you're not taking care of yourself physically, chances are your emotions are going to follow in suit. Typically, when you do have an emotional response, there's an immediate physical response. So if the emotional response is fear, there's going to be subsequent fight or flight physical effects of that. So that's why I prioritize it so heavily in the hierarchy here. Your temperament will affect your ability to make effective decisions. So if this is not as balanced as possible, every category discussed hereafter is at risk of faltering. The next category is training or talent or your technical skills. So this category encompasses the mental and educational aspects of survival. So there is skill and there is ability. In kinesiology, we learned that there is a difference between skill and ability. Ability are largely fixed characteristics of an individual, whereas skills are things that you can develop. So if you're a 4-foot tall female, chances are you're never going to be the strongest person on the planet from a physical standpoint. However, you can hone other skills, be they mental or physical ones, in order to compensate for your weaknesses in other areas. So your training, dexterity, and proficiency at performing certain tasks can offset some of the inherent weaknesses in your abilities, and it's going to be to a large extent determining your survivability. So definitely education and training are going to be absolutely crucial. And the reason why I put this one after temperament is because you can have people who have all the book smarts and all the technical skills and all the training in the world, but if their temperament is not as well balanced and well rounded as possible, they're not going to be able to execute those protocols. So temperament is absolutely important once again, and it's going to affect how you enact your technical skills when it comes down to the wire. The next dimension of survivability is your ability to think or be tactical or tactful. So the ability to think analytically, critically, and be adaptable to adverse circumstances will be a major factor in your ability to keep it together. So this is different from the last category. Now in the last category, basically when you're talking about book smarts or education or skills or training, they're very fixed things. So it's memory based. Basically, you put something into a computer, the computer tells you an answer. The computer can't think creatively in a lot of ways, at least not yet as far as we know. But in order to be flexible, to be creative, to be analytical, that is distinct from just memorizing things and regurgitating information. They're two entirely different things. So you need to be adaptable to changing circumstances, especially when things don't go your way, or in the end of the world as we know it type situation. Things are going to change dramatically, so you're going to need to be not so functionally fixated in how you're seeing the world. You're going to have to think outside the box. So as important as it is to consider all the angles and make calculated decisions, it's also equally important to be decisive. So too much thinking and not enough doing is going to be counterproductive in the long run. Now, I've heard it said before that it's better to make a bad decision than no decision at all. The next category is toughness or tenacity. So toughness, I believe, is distinguished from your ability to self-regulate your emotions. It goes into the level of personal motivation and how fired up you can get about surviving. Persistence, determination, resilience, these are all going to be factors which contribute to your survival, and they're going to be playing major roles depending on the circumstances. Now, toughness is not to be confused with a physical thing. Toughness and tenacity, they have less to do with strength and the scale of your muscle mass as they do your ability to persevere in spite of what's in front of you in the face of adversity. I've seen a lot of people, big or small, buckle under the pressure. So it's not just about how big you are or how much gear you have or how much training you have. It's going to be how much can you push yourself. Most people have never pushed themselves to even 50% of their physical capacity in their lifetimes. To push yourself 100% is basically to push yourself to the point of complete bodily breakdown, and that's going to be your death. You're going to have a heart attack or something like that. So most people haven't even approached 50%, much less 75%. Maybe some marathon runners have approached the 75% mark where they've put in so much work, or some boxers maybe who've hung around to the 12th round and just refused to give up. That's toughness, that's determination. It's independent of all other psychological aspects outside of its ability to push an individual to make progress in physical activities. It's certainly related to your temperament, so if you're sitting there telling yourself that while this situation sucks and you're thinking to yourself, all the negative aspects of a situation, then yes, that's going to impact your ability to want to persevere. When times get tough, some people bicker and complain, other people act helpless, other people talk about what they could have done and what they should have done. So as Anthony Hopkins said in the movie The Edge, people die of shame. Other people just block out all of that negative natter in their heads and try to make calculated decisions on how to survive. They think objectively and they do things methodically, and that's what you're going to have to do. In order to persevere, it may require you to MacGyver the situation a bit. You may have to use every little thing that's at your disposal towards the end of surviving and progress. So transcending the mental barriers which limit your ability to have the endurance to persevere will ultimately separate the weak from the strong. The next category is temperance, or thrift, or being thorough. So the ability to moderate and ration your consumption of your supplies is going to be critical in a survival situation. So there's going to be a need to show self-restraint, to have self-discipline and self-control, not only in your affairs materially, but also interpersonally as well. And not only after a disaster, but before a disaster, just in life in general. That's really a measure of success, is how much self-control you have. How much can you delay the gratification? Having a routine, your time management skills, your ability to make goals and completing them accordingly. That's going to enhance your ability to survive. So having a schedule, having a routine, not at the expense of your security. You don't want to be too predictable, but you do want to have some method to what you're doing and some temperance with respect to how you go about utilizing the resources around you. The next category is teamwork or trust, and I struggled as to where to put this one in the hierarchy, but I thought that I would put it later on because it's not necessarily individual based. It certainly depends on your interpersonal skills, but the first 8 categories are solely about you, the survivor, and the last 2 are perhaps a bit more social in nature, perhaps, or out of this world, if you will. So teamwork or trust. Now this category is related to group dynamics, of course, and you may be in a group and they may be people who function independently of you, or they may be people who are dependent upon you. So they could be your children, they could be elderly relatives, people with disabilities, etc. Some of them are going to provide you with support. Others may not be able to pull their weight, but they may provide you with a sense of purpose, adding to your motivation or your toughness, your will to live. Now, as human beings with our tribalistic roots, obviously we need people in order to survive. So we are not endowed with the instinctive prowess and all-around roughness of wild animals. So our survival and ultimately our thriving depends on our ability to work together in a harmonious fashion. So people are the primary force multipliers that keep on giving. People can think independently, and they're great resources, which is why we call people human resources. As dehumanizing as that term might be, the fact is people are probably going to be one of your best resources and investments. This is why I see children as an investment, and my personal belief is that preppers should aspire to have families, because families and people, children, are going to be investments for the future. So the more people you have in your group, the greater possibility for specialization at certain tasks, which is going to lead to increased productivity. You're going to need some measure of social organization, as I talked about in the hard and soft skills after the collapse video that I recently did. Now, lastly is the theory or theological dimension. Now, your reason for living is arguably as important as all the aforementioned categories here. This needn't be religious in nature. If you're not a religious person, it could just be theoretical. So you could have a philosophy of life, which is just theoretical, as opposed to a religious belief, which too is theoretical, but of course it has its own category of being religious and perhaps spiritual, or believing in some theism of sorts. So reasons for living, especially in the abstract existential sense, are absolutely critical and have been proven to be throughout history. So a belief system can be immensely motivating, not always for good, arguably, as the morality of a belief is ambiguous by some standards. You can have people who are galvanized by a belief which is totally backwards, degenerate, and immoral. Nonetheless, it's still a motivating factor. So a higher sense of purpose is a huge motivating factor, and definitely is going to contribute to that toughness thing, and all the categories really preceding this, because a common belief system can knit together that social solidarity very strongly if properly executed. So it definitely can be a social glue of sorts which unites and bonds people towards a common goal. So these are the 10 categories I put forth. I do believe it to be a concise list of what goes into comprising the holistic survivor. Remember, surviving is just not about bug out bags and gear. There's a lot more to it than that, a lot more. Because that gear, that might take you a few days, maybe even a few weeks. But ultimately, all these other factors that I've just talked about are going to come into play. And if they're not balanced, it's going to significantly impact your ability to survive any situation. And you can apply this to life in general. I try to make sure that when I do preparedness that everything is versatile in the sense that it can also pertain to life in general. So when I set a new physical goal, it's not just for the purpose of prepping for SHTF. It's also going to be pertinent towards making me a stronger, more successful person just in my everyday life in a pre-grid down situation. Because chances are we may never see a global disaster situation on the scale that some of us ruminate about. So it's important that we make sure that everything we do can not only be applied to that situation, but is applicable to the pre-collapse version of ourselves. So let me know what you guys think about this. I hope it's been useful to you. And if you wanted to self-assess yourself on the basis of these 10 dimensions, just remember it's best to be as honest as possible. Honestly, if I did this right now, I'd probably only be a 50 out of 100. So I still have a lot of things to work on, which is great, because that means I'm only halfway there. And of course, that means that there's a lot more to come. One of those videos is going to be called Things Fall Apart, which is still a work in progress, and it should be coming in a few weeks' time. In between that, I'll be doing a lot of different gear reviews and testing out my tools and technology capabilities. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.